Welcome to another special edition of Go Vote Omaha. This is a candidate forum for Legislative District 6 in the unicameral, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Jerry Simon, a League member and moderator for the forum. The League of Women Voters never supports or opposes political parties or candidates. We present this forum solely for voter education. Here's the format we'll be using. Each candidate will have a 1-minute opening statement. We'll follow that with questions prepared by the League of Women Voters. Each candidate will have up to 90 seconds to answer every question. And the candidate who answered the question first will have up to 30 seconds of rebuttal time if they desire. We'll end the forum with 1-minute closing statements. A timekeeper will alert the candidates when they have 30 seconds of time remaining and when to stop speaking. Before the forum, the candidates drew lots to determine their initial speaking order, which will alternate throughout the forum. And I will introduce them to you in that order now. There are 2 candidates running for Legislative District 6 in the unicameral. They are Theresa Thibodeau and Machaela Cavanaugh. Let's go right to opening statements, beginning with Theresa.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jerry, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this and educating the voters in our district. And thank you to Machaela for being here tonight as well. My name is Theresa Thibodeau. I am the current senator representing Legislative District 6 down in Lincoln. And I decided to go for the appointment. I was an appointed senator. I decided to go for the appointment because I have worn many different hats in my lifetime. My husband and I, we were married in 2001. We have 3 children. During that time, I have worked in human resources. I have stayed at home with my children, and now I am a small business owner. So I have seen the struggles that people go through and the things that they are facing on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. Machaela.
Hi, thank you. Thank you to Jerry and the League of Women Voters, and thank you to Senator Thibodeau for taking time to be here today. I am Machaela Cavanaugh. I am an Omaha native. I live in the district with my husband, Nick, and our 3 children, Della, Harriet, and Barrett, our newest addition. I decided to run for this seat well over a year ago. I didn't like what I was seeing happening down in Lincoln in the Capitol, and I decided that it was time that we had a representative that was going to be fighting for those that didn't have a voice in Nebraska. And I'm here today, and I'm here on this campaign trail to give voice to issues that are facing Nebraska families. Healthcare, education, housing, jobs. These are some of my priorities. I hope to work to close the opportunity gap for every Nebraskan and those living in our district.
Thank you. We're ready for our first question, and it will go to Machaela first. Do you support legislation to allow Nebraska farmers to grow industrial hemp?
Yes, I do support legislation to grow industrial hemp. I think that we need to be being strategic and proactive in being economic drivers in this state. And we need to be looking for ways to support our farmers and growing their business, the agricultural business. And agricultural hemp is an excellent option and opportunity for our farming community.
Thank you. Theresa.
Yes. There was actually a bill that came in front of the Agricultural Committee just this last session that I sat on. It did not come up for a vote to get voted out of committee. However, in listening to the arguments, industrial hemp would be a great way for our struggling ag economy to make a comeback. So I do support industrial hemp as long as we can make sure that we are not hiding illegal marijuana within that. Now, hemp plants look a lot different than marijuana plants, but you can hide them within. The other thing we have to make sure as well is that we need to look to the federal government because they need to make hemp, they need to get that out of the regulation as if it's the same thing as marijuana. Hemp does not have the same capabilities of making somebody high like a marijuana plant does. And so I would look to the federal government to get rid of that and differentiate between hemp and marijuana, and then we would be able to bring that as a new agricultural industry into Nebraska.
Thank you. Any rebuttal, Machaela?
I would just like to say that I think that it's important that we continue to diversify our agricultural community and opportunities, and I would look forward to the opportunity to working on that and hope that we can find a way to do it without too many regulations to make it difficult for our farmers.
Thank you. Our next question. No legislation for property tax reform was passed in the unicameral this session. What legislation is needed on Nebraska property taxes? And we'll begin with Theresa.
Well, first, what we have to realize is that property tax is a local tax. It's controlled by the local municipalities. And so it's very hard for the state to provide property tax relief. There are two ways the state can do that. One, provide a property tax credit, which has been done. And in fact, this year, I believe there will be $221 million given in property tax credits. The other way would be to limit the control of local school districts and local governments on their levies, and I am not in favor of limiting local control. So really, what I think the answer is we need actual complete tax reform. We need to look at where our money is coming from. We need to look at the tax exemptions, and we need to look at how we can lower property taxes not only for our rural farmers, but for the urban communities as well. We are all suffering from high property taxes. As I go door to door, everybody is telling me they need property tax relief. Just this last weekend, I heard a couple of neighbors told me the story about the same neighbor who moved out of her home because she was retired, and so she could no longer afford the property taxes on her home. So again, we're losing senior citizens not only to property tax, but also to Social Security tax.
Thank you. Machaela.
Yes, I believe that our property taxes are a burden for Nebraskans, and they're a burden across the state and in our communities. We aren't going to see property tax reform until we look at a different way of funding services, both at the local level and the state level. Over the last few years, we've seen more of the state's funding to services at the local level cut, and that's going to impact our property taxes. We're not going to be able to reduce property taxes and have comprehensive property tax reform until we start looking at what services that were being funded at the state level are now being pushed down to the local level. I believe that we need to, as a state and the state government, look at how we are funding these services and where we're cutting taxes and where we're cutting budgets. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in our state budget to relieve the cost of governing for local governments.
Thank you. Theresa, any rebuttal?
Yes, what I would like to say is that we are, with increasing costs, the state budget is very hard to manage. There could be some extra cost savings that we could find within our state budget by consolidating agencies, looking at things like that. But if we are asking the state to add more money, then we need to look at where is that money going to come from, and we need to really seriously think about that and look at the long-term effects. Right now, we don't want to be just reactionary. We need to do something now and make sure it lasts.
Thank you. Here's our next question. Recent research has questioned the benefits of local and state government giving economic development incentives to businesses, finding that the incentives are too expensive and they fail to produce promised results like high-paying job creation and economic growth. What should the unicameral do about economic development incentives in Nebraska? Should it restructure the Nebraska Advantage Law that is set to sunset? And we'll begin with Machaela.
Yes, I think that economic development packages are vital to, obviously, economic development in any state, and we should continue to explore the impact and the usefulness of them in our state. There is, of course, the question as to whether or not they're effective or not, and we should be evaluating those that we've been giving out and how effective they've been to the economy of Nebraska and to the people of Nebraska. I would like to see our economic development packages include more in the way of housing, because we know that jobs are what we have here in Nebraska, but we don't have the housing. And without housing, we're never going to be able to fill those jobs. So our economic development packages should include accountability for how we're going to get people to the jobs and transportation as well. I think that Nebraska is a great place to live and a great place to have a business, but we can't be giving out government funds without having some sort of standard for measuring outcomes as to whether or not the state is seeing a benefit to those economic development packages.
Thank you. Theresa.
Yes, with the Nebraska Advantage Act sunsetting, and that's why it is always good to put sunsets on things, because it does require the legislature to go back and look and see how it is working and if the state has received any benefits from that. From looking at the Nebraska Advantage Act, it does need to be looked at and it does need to be redone. However, we cannot get rid of all economic incentives for businesses to come here. One, a lot of businesses don't like to come here because our income tax rate is so high. So what other mechanism do we have to recruit businesses, small businesses, large corporations to our state? We did pass a bill last session that did address a housing shortage issue in rural Nebraska, and it did extend into urban as well, and that is the availability for some TIF financing for developers so that they can bring housing to rural Nebraska where there are jobs and people will have a place to live. With that, we need to watch how those funds are being used, make sure they're not being taken advantage of, and we can look at cities like Omaha who have done a great job with their TIF financing and not taking advantage of it, and how that has helped redevelopment in Omaha.
Thank you. Machaela, any rebuttal?
Yes, I think that we have a workforce that is here and ready to fill jobs, and that is why we are attractive to businesses. But again, the housing issue, in this last legislative session, there was an opportunity to expand land bank to other parts outside of Omaha. That program has worked very well here in Omaha, and I think it'd be great to see the land banks expanded to the rest of the state so that we can continue to develop housing, affordable housing for the jobs that we are trying to recruit for.
Thank you. The next question. Last session in the unicameral, a bill to allow tax credits for donations to scholarship funds to send children to private schools failed to pass. Do you support such legislation? And we'll begin with Theresa.
Well, first on that bill, it didn't fail to pass because it never got voted upon. And unfortunately for that bill, and it is why I like debate on the floor, is that the bill was filibustered before the senator who was introducing the bill could even open up on it. And so it didn't allow a lot of time for a lot of us senators to figure out if this Scholarship Act would take money away from the public schools. So if it were to take money away from the public schools, then I would not have supported it. As it was presented, there was a lot of different information out there going back and forth, but unfortunately, no one got the real opportunity to put the real information out there and to see how it would affect our public schools. I believe parents should have the ability to choose what school is best for their child. And in our public school system, we already have that ability, parents already have that ability to choose because we have school choice. You can opt in to other school districts if you choose to do that. So I am a proponent of school choice as long as it does not take away from the funding for the public schools.
Thank you. Machaela.
As Senator Thibodeau said that this didn't get to be debated fully on the floor, I would not support any legislation that would take dollars away from public school education. This particular piece of legislation I have concerns about because of the tax implications both at the federal and state level. It appeared to work out to more than a refund of your taxes if you applied it to both your state and your local income tax. You ended up getting money back by making those donations and declaring them. So if that is how the legislation would ultimately play out, I would not support that, and I would not support anything that would take funds away from public education. I think that we need to be investing more in public education, not less.
Thank you. Theresa, any rebuttal?
Yes, so one thing about that bill to understand is that it was applied as a tax credit, which means when you're filing your taxes, yes, you can use it as an actual credit towards towards your income. Depending on your tax level, you may or may not get money back. But one thing we have to remember is the people that would be paying into that and the people that would choose to send their children to a private school would still be paying property taxes that would go to the school district.
Thank you. We're going to stay with education on this next question, beginning with Machaela. Does Nebraska adequately fund public education at the state level? What is your approach to funding public education?
Nebraska does not fund public education appropriately at the state level. We are 49th in the nation in how we fund public education and the amount of funding that we give at the state level. We should be placing a higher premium on the value of education and educational services to children here in Nebraska. A greater investment needs to be made at the state level. I would propose legislation to increase funding at the state level, and there is always an opportunity to look at where the state is spending its dollars and reevaluate what our priorities are, and public education should be our #1 priority.
Thank you. Theresa.
Yes, and just to start off with, the state does fund education at $1.5 billion per year. So the state gives public education a lot of money. Is that enough? Probably not, especially in our rural areas, and that it goes back to our TIOSA formula, which completely needs to be redone. If you look at the rural school districts, they are not getting the funding that they need. Their schools are falling apart. They do not have the best learning environment for their children. So the state does need to fund and make sure every child has the best learning environment for them. Again, though, when we are looking at prioritizing and looking at where the money is coming from, we also have to think of our senior citizens. We have to think of our corrections department. We have to think of all these very important departments that need money from the state. We were able to keep things flat for the public schools this year and not cut any money, and I was grateful for that. And I hope that we can continue to do that and then find money in our budget when we have a surplus to help fund public schools at a higher rate.
Thank you. Any rebuttal, Machaela?
Yes, I would just like to say that I think that we need to have more investment in public-private partnerships here in Nebraska. It's unfortunate that after this last legislative session, the governor line item vetoed a piece of legislation that would have put more private dollars and resources to our public education through a social work program that was presented by Senator Walz. And I think that we can be looking for more opportunities for public-private partnerships and to be creative with how we're getting resources diverted to public education.
Thank you. Next question. A 2014 University of Nebraska study on climate change concluded that Nebraska needs to have a comprehensive plan of action to prepare for climate change. What should state government be doing about it? And would you support legislation to require and develop a climate action plan for Nebraska? And we'll begin with Theresa.
Well, climate change is very important to a lot of people, obviously across the country as well as in the state of Nebraska. We need to look at things and make sure that when we are producing legislation, we are not making it overburdensome for businesses. I know one of the industries that takes a lot of heat is the coal industry because they have been known to do damage to the climate, but now there is clean burning coal. And so we need to make sure that that continues to grow. We also are having alternative modes of transportation with electric car systems and those types of things. So yes, we do need to address climate change in the legislature, but we do need to do it in a responsible way so we are not putting undue regulation and burdens on businesses.
Thank you. Machaela.
Yes, I do believe that climate change is an issue as we've seen the monsoon of rain that we've been experiencing here in Omaha for the last couple of weeks, and that there is an opportunity for the state legislature to take a role and a lead in this. We also have the opportunity and resource here in our state with the university and several different departments at the University of Nebraska to draw upon for guidance and advice on things that the state can be doing better to help impact our climate. One such entity would be the Water for Food and the Rural Futures can both contribute a lot to the legislative climate change package that we could be putting forth at the state level. I also think that the state and our local governments should be working harder on public transit and reducing the need for using vehicles which oftentimes have one passenger in them. And I think that we overall can be smarter about what we're doing as a community in our city planning and our plannings across the state. And I would support any legislation that would bring forth innovative ways of accessing renewable resources such as wind and solar energy.
Thank you. Theresa, any rebuttal?
Yes. And when we look at, giving more access to transportation, absolutely, we need to have access to transportation from where people live to where the jobs are. And having, the bus route that we have now in Omaha works very well. I would not look at doing that on a state level because what works well in Omaha or works well in Lincoln may not work well in rural Nebraska. So I believe in leaving that up to local control.
Thank you. Our next question. What do you think is needed to address gun violence in Nebraska? Would you support a ban on large capacity magazines, bump stocks, research on gun violence by the medical center in Omaha, a ban on assault-type firearms, and truly universal background checks on all gun sales? And we'll begin with Machaela.
Yes, we need gun reform in Nebraska and in our country. I would support background checks, closing loopholes, and the bump stocks, making it illegal to purchase bump stocks here in Nebraska. I think that we also, when it comes to gun issues, we need to be focused on behavioral health. We have a behavioral health epidemic in this state and in this country. And when we're talking about gun violence, it's not just about access, though access to guns and weapons that are assault weapons is a huge issue, and we need to address that head on. But we also need to be addressing the behavioral health component in the gun violence. And I think that again goes back to early investment in social services and behavioral health services across the state. And I would really like to see our state legislature bring forth this kind of legislation and be proactive in protecting our children from gun violence.
Thank you. Theresa.
I absolutely agree that we need to address the gun safety issue. We need to, and I would support a ban on bump stocks. There is no reason to have bump stocks. They're not used in hunting or anything like that. But again, it comes back to early intervention, as Machaela said, and she mentioned earlier with regards to the bill that I did vote on and I was unhappy that it was vetoed, is putting social workers in schools to help evaluate those children who are having problems early on and to evaluate mental health issues. Because the earlier you can help a child and intervene, the better outcomes you have. And as we can see, we can take away any types of guns, but look at what's happening right now in Chicago. Gun violence every single weekend. And so we really need to look at addressing the problems that are underlying the gun violence.
Thank you. Machaela, anything further?
I just would reiterate that we don't want to be another state that sees shootings on TV. It has personally affected my family, and I'm sure there are others in this state that are personally affected by the national gun violence that we're seeing in schools. So we need to be doing everything we can to work together to make sure that Nebraska isn't the next national news story.
Thank you. We're ready for our candidates' closing statements, and we'll start with Theresa Thibodeau.
Well, thank you again to the League of Women Voters for this opportunity to talk with the voters of District 6. I was very happy with the results of the primary and to come out ahead in the primary. I am working very hard, going door to door, listening to your concerns, bringing those concerns back to the legislature. And again, my idea as a senator is to look at policy, not politics. So as your state senator, I look at policies that work well for the citizens of District 6, as well as for the entire state of Nebraska. And I look forward to November 6th and ask for your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, Machaela Cavanaugh.
Thank you. Thank you again to the League of Women Voters and to Senator Thibodeau for coming here today. I would just like to let the voters know that regardless of gender, race, orientation, and education, I believe that every Nebraskan should have access to high-quality health care, safe working conditions, equal pay for equal work. I will fight for my constituents and all Nebraskans, and we should be welcoming to every family, no matter what your family looks like. I will fight for free, fair, and accessible elections, paid family leave, Medicaid expansion, increased investment in behavioral health services, and access to affordable housing across the state. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The League of Women Voters would like to thank both of our candidates for being in this forum this evening. That concludes our forum for Legislative District 6 in the unicameral. For the League of Women Voters, I'm Jerry Simon, reminding you to inform yourself about the issues and the candidates. And on Election Day, November 6th, go vote Omaha.